Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am pleased to be joined by a regular guest of the show, one of my favorite people in the economist space. He's an author. Actually, I have one of his books right here, Spiders in Space, which I highly recommend. Speaker, uh, you're author, speaker, economist. Todd, what else do you do? You do a lot of stuff.
Well, that's sort of the major stuff. I'm also a dog walker
A dog
of
walker
my two Boston Terriers. That seems to take up all my time.
and a sneakerhead, it looks like, too.
And a sneaker collection. My office has turned into a shoe museum, as you can see.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Some Jordans there. Is there any ones in particular that stand out?
Uh, Not really particularly, but kind of love them all. Yeah,
Oh, that's good. I like the collection. It adds some depth to the background, so it looks really cool.
thank you.
So, lots to talk about since we chatted last.
Yeah.
And I think you might have one of the hardest jobs in the world as an economist trying to figure out what's going to happen in 2025 when we don't know what's going to happen on Monday. Walk me through it. What you think? Where do you think we stand right now in the midst of all this chaos? What's going on in the world right now?
Well, I think chaos is about the best word that sort of sums it up. And, long ago, long before Donald Trump and all these tariffs, I've sort of shifted my gears as an economist a little bit, moving away from trying to forecast what's going to happen and rather trying to help audiences prepare for anything that could happen. Because, even long before these tariffs, the world is a complicated place. Things move very, very quickly, and situations change very rapidly. And the trouble with sort of traditional economic forecasting, and I spent 30 years in my career trying to do this, is the minute you lock in your forecast of what you think is going to happen, you've got all your assumptions on different things, you hit send on your forecast, and it's already outdated because something has changed. And especially in 2025, the idea of trying to forecast the economy, it's sort of a fool's game. And I'm glad actually now I am no longer in charge of economics team at a bank. I did that for 16 years. And my job was to try to forecast Alberta, specifically Alberta's economy. I'm glad I'm not in that role anymore, to be honest, because it's just too difficult, especially these days with Donald Trump and the tariff talk and on again, off again. And say what you want about Donald Trump, but he is an agent of chaos. And that is kind of the way he deals with his opponents, as he keeps them on their back foot. Maybe this is a negotiating tactic, but you never know from one minute to the next what the negotiation is going to look like. So that's a long way of saying it is chaos. The Canadian economy in not particularly great shape at the moment. A lot of that because of the uncertainty around tariffs. On the other hand, we have seen some more encouraging, globally anyway, we've seen some more encouraging talk on tariffs. We've seen a real reduction in the trade, disputes between China and the United States, and also a trade deal, even though it's not a fantastic one, but a trade deal between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I think, we've seen markets cheer up in the last little while because of this, the temperature and this tariff disputes coming way down. Where that leaves Canada, we'll have to wait to see when the 90 days is over. I think that is sort of end of June. But I think we still need to prepare for anything that could happen this year.
There's a cliche that gets tossed around all too often about kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to be said about that, not just with the pause on Canada, but also with the one on China. And that was escalating dramatically, where a new tariff or an increase in the tariff was getting proposed seemingly every day. And
Yeah.
when they announced that they also kicked the can down the road on that, there was quite a bit of relief. The stock market went up. Everybody seemed to have a little bit more optimism in there. Is there that sense, or does that just add to the chaos that we're living in right now, that this might just be something that we have to deal with for the foreseeable future, is this impending uncertainty and unknowingness about what's actually going to happen?
Well, I do think that we remain in chaos, but I guess in times of chaos and panic and crises, you take whatever good news you can,
Hmm.
and even a little spark of good news or some optimism on the tariff front, and again we saw markets really cheer up because of that. So I would definitely say we're not out of the woods. To use another cliche, we're not out of the woods with this tariff madness in 2025. But at least we have seen an example of, okay, is there a possible way out of this for the United States and the global economy? Is there a path forward, even if it ends up that there are tariffs in place? Can we at least anticipate perhaps some certainty? And that's what a lot of businesses here in Canada have been telling me is none of them want tariffs, but they've all been saying if it's going to be tariffs, just let us know what the tariff is going to be. And at least we can plan around that. It doesn't mean we're going to be happy, but we can make plans around that. But when it's always this uncertainty from sometimes even within a day, is it a tariff, no tariffs, what's going to happen, on again, off again? That is impossible for businesses to try to plan around. And I think that we've seen in the last week or so at least a glimmer of hope that we can get to a point where this wild uncertainty dies down. We might end up with some global tariffs that might mean global growth slows down, and it will in Canada, but at least it will give us a sense of stability.
You made a really insightful post on LinkedIn the other day, and in the show notes I'm going to put a link to your LinkedIn because I think everybody should be following you because you put out some great ones. But one in particular I really enjoyed, and I'll just put what the first line is, and I'd like you to elaborate on it. You just said tariffs are neither good nor bad. And
Mm.
then you had to say, yes, you read that correctly, because I think a lot of people probably do lean one way or the other on that. Can you elaborate on that post?
Yeah, well, I was trying to be a bit provocative. As always, you try to get people's interest, and being provocative by saying, tariffs aren't necessarily good or bad. It's what they lead to. And of course, if you read the whole post, the idea is a tariff is really just an accounting measure. It doesn't mean anything. What ends up happening, though, through a chain of events, is that eventually people will lose their jobs and incomes go down. I think all of us can agree that is a bad thing, especially for those people who lose their jobs. In a sort of a mental exercise, you could think about, okay, if tariffs were put in place, and this is imaginary, but nobody loses their job, would we even care? And I think the final answer would be no. We care about these tariffs because it is going to mean job losses. So rather than getting all worked up about tariffs that Donald Trump may impose, we can't control that. We need to focus on the potential job losses and losses to economic activity and business activity, here in Canada or wherever you are. The same thing for businesses in the United States, and sort of focus on that. That is going to be the problem: is job losses, and what actions can we take as industry, as governments, as friends and neighbors to help sort of get us over the pain of these job losses. It is going to be some disruption, but let's focus on that rather than just focusing on the tariff.
Yeah, well said. The one thing that I find so peculiar, particularly as it relates to the space that we're in industrial real estate, is that the tariffs are meant to encourage or incentivize, at least in the US's case, to incentivize more reshoring, more onshoring, more manufacturing back in the US. But
Yeah.
these decisions that are being made and the tariffs and the impact that they're having are immediate, whereas the process of taking a new factory from site selection to figuring out where it's actually going to work to labor, building out a business case for it, constructing it, that's a 3 to 5 year process. So it's very difficult for a company to say, okay, well, these tariffs are trying to incentivize me to onshore back to the US, but it's a 3 to 5 year process and potentially longer if you want to do it at scale. Are you hearing from companies, or do you think that that's a real concern for companies or property owners or developers that say we can't commit to long-term processes with short-term incentives?
I definitely think that is a potential problem. I still think a lot of large companies, the ones that would be spending significant capital on industrial development, I still think they're in a wait and see. Now, we did see that announcement from Honda, I think it was, that they are delaying or canceling or postponing, I don't know what the word is, investments in capital in Canada, because I think they're in a wait and see mode. I don't know if we have seen significant decisions around, okay, we are canceling this foreign operation and we're relocating it to the United States. And this is all going ahead right now. We might start to see some of that. I think we're in this wait and see. We're in that. Some of the viewers on this podcast will be of my generation, and you'll remember Wile E. Coyote from the old Roadrunner cartoons. And there's this terrific scene all the time where Wile E. Coyote goes running off the cliff and he dangles there for a few seconds and he thinks he might be okay before gravity takes over and it ends poorly for him. We're in that Wile E. Coyote stage right now where we don't know, is gravity going to take over and these tariffs go into place, or might we see a different outcome? And while we're in that Wile E. Coyote stage, it's really difficult for these companies to be making major decisions on if they're going to relocate plant and equipment in the United States, or if they're going to go ahead business as usual with their already planned investments in Canada and South Korea and elsewhere.
So what do these companies do then? Is it as simple as just waiting, or because business has to go on too? They still have obligations and they
Uh,
shareholders and they need to continue going. What do companies do when they're faced with, like, a situation like this?
I think a lot of these boardroom conversations right now are exactly that. Like, what are we supposed to do in this environment? Because it's sort of a new environment, this perpetual wait and see what's going to happen. And it's a very uncomfortable spot for businesses to be in. My guess is they're just running the clock, hoping for the best outcome. Eventually, they're going to have to make a decision. Are we going to cancel this, outside of the U.S. Industrial expansion, or are we going to relocate in the United States? Eventually, they'll have to make a decision. But at the moment, in May 2025, which is when we're talking, I think a lot of these board conversations and senior level executive conversations are all around what are we supposed to be doing and what are we going to tell shareholders?
Yeah, there's a lot to digest. I think upcoming financial reporting is going to be very interesting when companies start putting out forward guidance. I know a number of companies have even canceled or suspended their forward guidance because they
Yeah.
just don't know what to say on that. A few different directions I could think to take this, but really want to talk on the labor one for a minute because I think this is really important. You mentioned the tariffs could have a big impact on the labor market. What about some of the other factors that could also threaten it? And the easy one in my mind is AI. So with ChatGPT and all these things advancing at a pace that I can't even fathom, and I'm trying to stay on top of it. Do you see that being another global threat to the labor markets, or is that still too early to tell as well?
That one is more gradual, and I think in the long run, it could be either more disruptive or more sort of supportive of the economy. But it's sort of a longer game than the tariff conversations we're having in the spring of 2025, which all seem very immediate. But AI, the technological innovations that we are seeing, I do think that is going to be disruptive. But a friend of mine here in Calgary, Patrick Lohr, and some of you might know him. He's kind of a tech guy. He had a great quote. He said, AI is not going to take your job. The person who uses AI is going to take your job. And I think that kind of encapsulates where we're at with it. Sort of the conversation some of us from 30 years ago, 1992, when the internet and the World Wide Web started to arrive, and no one knew what this was going to mean. It was hard to sort of wrap your head around. How do you use this internet that they call it? What does it mean for business? But there was a sense this isn't going away after a few years. This isn't going away. Rather than it getting rid of jobs, people learned how to use it to amplify their jobs. And I think we're going to see the same thing with AI. Now, I would say there are limits to the comparison between the internet 30 years ago and AI today. AI, of course, having, artificial intelligence having some ability to actually change itself and learn and, manipulate itself. And that piece of it absolutely is new. And I think that is why some people are feeling quite anxious about AI. And I think we have reason to feel a little bit anxious about AI, and lots of dystopian futures you can kind of create. But at the same time, I think we can create some really utopian futures when we think about AI and the application of it, and how it has the potential, not just to get rid of jobs, but actually make us all more productive and create whole new industries and whole new jobs. Just like in 1992, web designer was not a job, it wasn't a word. No one knew, like, you wouldn't have talked about that. But today, of course, that is, an occupation. A lot of people involved in designing web applications. I think we'll see the same thing with AI, but it's funny because the conversations around technology and AI a year ago, that was the dominant theme around economics. And, I'd go to conferences and everyone wanted to talk about AI. And now, of course, it's all been overshadowed by the geopolitics, by wars raging all around the world, and of course, by Donald Trump returning to the White House. And again, all this tariff talk. It's completely eclipsed, I think, a lot of these conversations we were having about how do we, navigate our way through this world of artificial intelligence. So it's still all there in the background. It's been pushed to the sides, but my guess is that we are still going to have to pay attention to it. And that conversation, I think, will return maybe sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, me specifically, I would love to not have to, excuse me, have these conversations about geopolitical tensions and risks and all the things, tragedies happening all over the world. Oh, sorry, do we have some background noise? What? Wyatt, can you mute people? Um, so yeah, I'd rather not have to be worrying about all this geopolitical risk and actually focus on things that are encouraging. But it's the
Yeah.
landscape, I guess, that we're in. On the topic of AI, though, if one thing I'd really like to get your thoughts on, if you've given any consideration to this, is AI's contribution to self-driving vehicles. And this is just a topic that I've been exploring for a while. I thought we would have been there already. This is a slower uptake than I would have anticipated. Perhaps I've just been so close to it that whenever you're really close to something, it moves much slower than you expect it to.
Yeah.
But with AI now starting to contribute to this and make some advancements in self-driving, the one thing that I really am interested in following is if we do start getting mass adoption of self-driving vehicles, how does that change the real estate landscape? And I guess to frame that is, in theory, this could be 20, 30 years out, but if we don't have the need for as many vehicles as we do right now, what happens to parking garages? Parkades? What happens to garages in people's houses? What happens to parking
Yeah.
lots? How does that restructure the shopping mall? How does that restructure an industrial building that no longer has the need for parking lots? Assuming that it goes down that direction and we do have mass adoption of self-driving, have you given any thought to how that could radically transform real estate at large?
Well, it's a fascinating question. I have to admit, I haven't really thought about it a whole lot, not with respect to, what does it mean for real estate and parking garages and massive surface parking lots. But, I would share your like when you said, I thought we'd see more autonomous vehicles by now. I remember being at a conference in San Francisco in 2018. So that's now almost 8 years ago, 7 years ago. And it was very, very certain from these conference organizers is that within 5 years, we are going to see the entire, automobile industry turned on its head and autonomous vehicles everywhere. And we all sat there, with our jaws dropping because we thought, wow, this is happening, in 5 years. Well, here we are now almost 8 years out. And I don't think there is any, probably some US cities would have more autonomous vehicles, but it's not really the mainstream. And COVID may have disrupted it to some degree. That might have delayed some things. but I'm not sure why there has not been this uptake in autonomous vehicles. It might just be that, ultimately people are still not prepared to get behind or get in a vehicle with no physical human driver. Now, I think your other question is maybe more interesting. What eventually, if we see a revolution in automobile transportation and fewer cars and all this, what does it mean for parkades and parking lots? And I think that's a fascinating question. It's a little bit like some of the revolution we've seen in retail shopping spaces. A lot of these shopping malls throughout North America that were built in the 70s and 80s. And who would have thought by, in 1980 that people are not going to need a shopping mall as much. And a lot of these shopping malls have transformed. Either they've been torn down or they've been repurposed into something totally different. I know of one shopping mall in my hometown. It used to be the biggest shopping mall in that city. And now it's still there, but it is full of healthcare services. It's full of physiotherapists and dentists and, everything related to your physical health, doctor's offices, and all sorts of things. So I think there is a transformation now with parking and parking lots. What's going to happen to those? I think eventually we might be in a spot where we don't need as much surface parking, and parkades might have to be repurposed. What that all looks like and how that happens, I'd probably be coming to you, Chad, for your insights on that, because that has more to do with the industrial real estate space than I'll ever know about.
Yeah, great point on that. And I love how you brought up the conference in 2018 because that's probably about the time that I was really getting interested in it as well. And I thought at one point my kids would never drive. I
Yeah.
just thought that it was coming so fast, and then it seemed to hit a snarl.
And that's what they told us. They said, this
Yep.
is coming fast and we all need to get ready for
Yeah, and like everything, I think that especially the big voices out there like an Elon Musk who exaggerates everything and tries to make it seem like he's going to get everything done in the next year, when in reality this is probably one of the biggest challenges humanity's ever faced, is figuring out how to get a 2,000 pound piece of machinery to drive people with no human interaction in it. When you break it down like that, it's one of the biggest challenges we'll face. So there's a lot to it, and it's much more complicated. I think what my thoughts are, and when I was first starting to give this some consideration, is that we'll probably just see a lot more density, which is
Yeah.
probably a good thing, because especially in the industrial market, every industrial market, and even the people here would probably agree, is that it's all sprawl. So,
Yeah.
especially with cities that have the ability to grow in every direction, industrial buildings just get pushed further and further out into the suburbs, to the point where you might have a distribution center that's an hour outside of the metro city. So I think that what it could do is, if we could be more efficient with all the buildings and we don't need as much parking, all of a sudden you can just have that much more density on a site, and perhaps it could keep it from having to push those buildings further and further out, which I know from a city planning standpoint is really good, because the further you expand out, the more you need to run services now. So you need to
Yeah.
have more fire departments and police and schools, and the sprawl is a big problem from a city efficiency
Absolutely.
standpoint.
Yeah.
But I temper my expectations now, seeing how slow this is going. And I was in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago, and they're starting to have some self-driving cars that go up and down the strip now, but
Yeah.
it's on a very exclusive basis. I think it was invite only. I tried getting into one and I couldn't. So even in a city like Vegas, where you've got controlled temperature for the most part, and they've mapped that entire strip so efficiently, that's almost a closed circuit in terms of
Right.
how efficient that can be, and they're still struggling to do it there. So
Yeah.
now I don't know. I still think, with all the money and all the interest and all the investment that's getting put into it, I do think it's inevitable at some point. I don't know. I don't know how quickly that can come now.
Well, and it might be one of these examples of something where the technology seems to be taking forever, but then it hits an inflection point, and at some
Mm,
point it just kind of goes, you know, straight up. It might be something like that. In some ways, that's kind of the way the internet was. I mean, it took years for people to kind of, feel comfortable on it. But once somebody finally figured out how to do secure payments online, everything about online business changed very, very quickly. But it didn't happen instantly. It took years of getting used to it, of familiarizing ourselves with what the World Wide Web is, how do we use it. And again, it was that one technological piece of secure payment. So it might be the same for autonomous vehicles. It might be that at some point something happens where it hits an inflection point, and suddenly a whole new generation of people feel much more confident getting in a vehicle. But we're not there yet. It's not a steady, gradual process. It's kind of flat and then maybe up at some point.
Great point. This might be an odd question, but do you think there's any correlation between this environment of massive change that we're in right now with technology and the geopolitical risk that's emerged? Or are we just in this time and space where the geopolitical risk has been rising? And I mean, there's been geopolitical tension since the beginning of time, so it's not like this is anything new. But do you think this, where we're at right now, where there's so much tension and there's so much angst and people are concerned about this, do you think that there's a correlation with that, with this huge breakthrough in technology that we're experiencing?
Well, it's a fantastic question, and people much smarter than me, I'm sure, are writing books and PhD dissertations about this very thing. What happens in a world where geopolitical conflict and on ground war happening? How does that interrupt technology, industry, economic advancement? Certainly for consumers, I think a lot of consumers, if you're feeling anxious about something, even if it's a war raging thousands of miles away, that might affect if you're reading nothing but negative news and discouraging things in your social feeds. It will eventually wear down on your consumer confidence. You may feel less confident about buying a house or buying a car. But how it might interfere with technological advancements, I think that's a really interesting question. In some ways, in the history of humans, we've seen a lot of technological advancements happen during times of military conflict, because military is a great user of technology. And it's a lot of government money that goes into these things. I don't know if this is happening right now. It may or may not be happening. But even things like, the internet, going back to the 1950s, this was all developed by scientists and academics, and some of it was a response to the Cold War at the time. It was a means of military and government and academia being able to communicate very, very quickly. So even something like the internet, in some way, was a result of military conflict, or at least geopolitical tension. We might be seeing things that are taking place right now that we're not even aware of. And it might be that a few years down the line, we might see new technologies, and we might be able to pinpoint it back to the 2020s, when governments or military establishments were developing these technologies, and eventually they become mainstream in the economy.
Yeah, I sure hope that there's someone out there writing a dissertation on this topic, because I think it'd be so fascinating. And you
It's
even
an
just
interesting question. Yeah.
thinking back to the early 20th century when the automobile came into development with Ford, and it wasn't long after, and that had to have been the biggest disruptive technology of the early 20th century, and well, combined with the airplane as well. But it
Yeah.
wasn't long after that we had World War One. So I wonder if there is
Yeah.
some sort of correlation where countries just seem to perhaps get worried about the incoming technology, and they're trying to protect. Again, that's way above my pay grade too, but it's just, I guess, something really interesting to follow.
Well, and that might be another example, and it's out of my pay grade too, but I can't help but think that the Second World War was a war where aviation technology was really advanced, but it was all around developing better fighter jets. But then after the war, that technology was there, and it probably helped propel commercial aviation into the 50s and 60s. And that might not have happened had it not been. You never like to give war any there's not much good that comes out of it. But some of these technological advances in aviation, you could probably trace some of that back to and probably even the First and Second World Wars.
That's a really interesting thought. I want to shift to interest rates because this is something that's affecting everybody, and I can certainly appreciate it's impossible to predict what's going to happen on this. But what I'm so fascinated about is that President Trump is trying to put pressure on the feds to lower the overnight rate, when in all reality, it's the 10-year bond or the 10-year treasury that's influencing most long-term debt, certainly
Yeah.
influencing commercial loans. And I think I saw that the US was 4.5. I think that was yesterday, 4.5% for the 10-year. Do you have any idea, like what's your thoughts as an economist on, and there's probably scenario planning on this, and if this happens and that happens, but where we're at right now, even if there is some downward pressure or influence on the overnight rate, what do you think's happening to the 10-year treasury right now?
Well, this is a really interesting conversation, and what's happening in the US and to the same degree in Canada, when you're seeing central banks and you're seeing Jerome Powell and you're seeing Tiff Macklin at the Bank of Canada, and even they are saying we're not giving forward guidance anymore. We don't know we can't even suggest what's going to happen because of all, again, getting back to tariffs, because of all this wild uncertainty. And I think the bond market is a reflection of that too. There's just, on some days the bond market rallies and those yields narrow. Other days, it's tanking and the yields blow up. There's just not a lot of, at the moment, I think, solid direction in the bond market or even in central banks and monetary policy. It's all, again, this wait and see. And it all gets back to what we were talking about earlier. This is a terribly chaotic environment for anybody, a central bank, a bond trader, and then, of course, all the businesses that need to take out loans. How do you organize yourself and plan around that when the bond market feels a bit, without direction at the moment?
Yeah, it really is so uncertain on that, and it's a good reminder that there can be influence on lending rates, but there can't be influence on the bond market. That's just
That's right.
that's a
Yeah.
free market, and that's just going to move at will. Do
Yeah.
you have an idea on what triggers an increase in that 10-year? Do you have an idea on what triggers a decrease in that? I mean, the easy one is inflation. If inflation keeps going up, then we could expect that to go up. But when you're trying to evaluate where it could go, what factors are you looking at to say, well, if this happens, that happens?
Well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but if we see some resolution and some stability on tariffs and where these are all going and what it means for global trade and global commerce, I think that eventually will give the bond market some direction into the summer. I mean, that's a best case scenario. If by the end of June, in this 90-day period we're in right now, if it all kind of, if Donald Trump has a good golf game and he wakes up and he's feeling okay on that day, and the tariff talk comes way down and Donald Trump says, I've solved all the problems, then I think we could see more direction in that bond market and probably more of a sense that, we're going to see greater equilibrium and greater stability. Now, where the bond trade goes after that, again, it comes down to what happens with these tariffs. But hopefully by early summer into July and August, which is also a fairly quiet time, I think, for stock traders and the bond market. Hopefully we'll see some better direction by then.
I bet you everybody's just looking for a chance to catch their breath and have
Yeah,
a boring day would probably be so welcome for a lot of people right now, where we don't
exactly.
have to be tuned into the news or social media at all times just to get real-time updates. I bet you a boring day would be well appreciated right now. Uh, what I want to talk about global trade because this is another
Sure.
one that's closely related, and I don't want to beat the tariff drum to death, but it's clearly the biggest thing that we're all dealing with right now. How do you see global trade responding to all of this? And I think it's similar to the manufacturing space, where to create global trade and new supply routes and new trading partners, that's not an overnight process. That's something that
No.
can take years, if not decades. China became the world's factory starting in the late 70s, early 80s. So you look at that, that's 40, 50 years that they really built that up. So this isn't a quick decision. Do you see global companies and countries starting to make radical changes based on this tariff talk? Or do you think they're doing the exact same thing as the people in the boardroom? What do we do? What do we do, guys?
Yeah.
How are they making their decisions right now?
Well, it's a great question. Let's take a best case scenario again. Let's say Donald Trump at end of June, the 90 days are up and he backs way off the tariffs. Not entirely. We're still going to have the tariffs in China and different things. On UK, even their trade deal, there's a 10% tariff. So it's not that we're going back to no tariffs, circa 2010. But even if we come to a spot where the tariff tension is way down, I still think irreparable damage has been done to the global economy, supply chains, and the confidence that industries have in those supply chains. And by the way, this has been ongoing long before Donald Trump's second term, even before his first term. Probably somewhere around 2010, you could trace this all back. So Donald Trump wasn't even a presidential candidate then. Around 2010, even the Obama administration and other countries around the world were backing off global trade. Trade deals were harder to get done. Big countries like the United States were showing apathy or outright hostility to trade deals. We saw the Brexit. We saw the United Kingdom pull out of the European Union. So, in a lot of ways, globalization has been slowly unraveling for the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years. Now, that unraveling has accelerated tremendously with all of the current tariff talk, but it's not really new. It's really just kind of, pulling faster on the threads of the sweater that is falling apart. I don't think global trade is dead, of course, but I do think that countries and companies will be rethinking some of these supply chains. I think they are now far riskier. And I think we will gradually see, and it might accelerate, but we will see, I think, more onshoring of some of those supply chains. They'll cost more for sure, but I think companies will be looking to de-risk some of these traditional global supply chains when a component part that goes into anything, if it's an automobile or an iPad, these component parts from all around the world and all this just-in-time supply chain that we had sort of perfected by 2010. It is no longer a risk-free proposition. And I think countries and companies and industries will be looking to de-risk some of that. Again, it might come at a higher cost, but probably more onshoring, or what we've talked about, friendshoring. Who do you think are your rock solid, dire ride allies in trade? And that list is becoming shorter too.
Yeah, there's always that trade-off between being a service economy and a manufacturing economy. And I
Yeah,
think North America, or perhaps even expand that to just being the Western world, has tried transitioning away from being a manufacturing economy towards being a service economy. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Their service economy should have higher wages, higher quality of life, but that trade-off is that you lose your manufacturing base. And I think at
that's
one
right.
point the US made, and this was only several decades ago, the US produced 50% of the world's steel, and now they produce less than 5% of the world's steel because all those jobs got and all that manufacturing got offshored to China and Japan and other countries.
Yeah.
Is there a way to even bring that back? Is there an appetite to say, okay, we're gonna open up 10 steel manufacturing plants this year? Is there the labor there? Is there the appetite there? Is there the, and that's the appetite on the supply side. Is the appetite on the demand side to pay those increased prices that are going to come with that as well, because the labor
Yeah.
is going to be 5 to 10 times as expensive.
Yeah, it's and people could ask Donald Trump and the people around him that are trying to recreate this industrial complex of the 1950s, and try to convince them that this world can't be brought back, not in the same way. These good-paying factory jobs which, by the way, I don't know if anyone really loved these factory jobs back in the 50s. I mean, a lot of them paid well and it supported communities and supported families. But, is factory work this really laborious, like tough, hard, like bad for the environment, bad for your physical health? Is this really what we want to bring back? Some people might say yes, because we want to, dare I say it, make America great again. But there's this nostalgia that we're trying to bring back that bygone era. It can't be brought back. You could build new factories, but by and large, they're going to be all automated and full of robotics. And you're not going to bring back those factory jobs in the same way. All you're going to do is make the cost of that steel much more expensive for consumers, and that is going to weigh on the prosperity and buying power of U.S. and Canadian households.
Great point. And I had this conversation with somebody the other day that any of this manufacturing work that's going to come back, it's either going to be very high tech, because then it makes sense to do it here. Then the labor component isn't nearly as much if they're making semiconductors or EV or whatever it is. I think those jobs, there is a case to come back, and it's already happened. We've seen
Yeah.
proliferation of those factories already come back. Anything non-high tech related, like you said, it's going to be automated. There's going to be robotics doing it. It brings this conundrum in my mind that there's this push to bring these manufacturing capabilities back to North America, but it's not going to come with jobs. So what we're doing is we're now taking these jobs from countries that are doing these very capably, just to bring it back to the U.S. so that we can automate it. So there's a net loss of jobs where the only thing that we benefit from is that it's going to be made in North America. Meanwhile, there's going to be displacement of numerous jobs in other countries. And I think the comment that I made to the person is that it's that evil mentality that it's not enough that we win, it's that others have to lose.
Yeah.
Of being so
Yeah.
aggressive with it. So do you see that as well, as that if those do come back, then we do have jobs in China or jobs in India that otherwise would have been great paying jobs for people eagerly looking to do them, just so we can bring that back here and automate it.
Well, it's such an interesting conversation. And the other element of this that we haven't even mentioned yet is the fact that the US economy they have 4% unemployment. Like, they are at full employment. Even if we were going to be creating all these jobs, and I suppose in the short run there'd be a lot of construction jobs, who's going to build this? You've got a tight labor market already. It's not that you've got a 12% unemployment rate with a lot of excess labor sitting around, a lot of skilled tradespeople just waiting for something to do. In that environment, there might even be some logical sense, or there might be an easier way to sell this idea that let's start building factories because we've got all these electricians and welders and plumbers waiting for something to do. That is not the case in the United States. And in fact, if anything, if this started to work and companies really started to invest in machinery and equipment and new facilities in the US, you're probably just going to drive up construction wages and squeeze out stuff that's already taking place because it no longer becomes affordable.
Yeah, it really does just speak to the chaos, and I think that's the
Chaos.
theme of the conversation is that everything that the chaos is creating will ultimately lead to perpetual more chaos. So which is just scary and concerning at the same time. If anybody has a question for Todd, by the way, please feel free to put it in the chat, or if you want to come on camera and ask, you're more than welcome to. We've got about 10 minutes left, so if you have a question for him, please let me know. Uh, on a lighter note, what message do you have for people right now that are concerned with this chaos? And I'm one of them. I'm one of them that part of me likes a little bit of chaos because I think it opens up opportunities. I think people that are talented and they're problem solvers and they're looking for opportunities, I think a little bit of chaos can open up things that otherwise might not have been available. The flip side of that is that chaos can be detrimental to a lot of other people. What do you say? What's your general message right now in this world of chaos that we're living in?
Well, I know you have a listeners on both sides of the border, U.S. and Canada. So I don't want to be too focused on either one. But for Canada, I would say there really is some benefit that is coming out of this chaos. It's uncomfortable, but I think this whole tariff threat has been a very unpleasant bucket of cold water to shock Canadians and Canadian industry out of this complacency that I have seen build over the last 40 years. And I know a lot of people want to say it's been the last 10 years of the Trudeau government, and there's lots of fingers you could point. But I think this goes way beyond just the Trudeau government of the last 10 years. I think this goes all the way back to the original free trade agreement of 1989, which was an enormous benefit for Canada and the United States. But I think you could also look, it started to be about that point where it came pretty easy. It became easy for Canadian industries to become a bit lazy and complacent. We didn't really have to hustle or work that hard because we had access to the world's largest economy, the United States. Anything we would chop down or dig out of the soil or grow or manufacture in a plant, we would sell across the river, the Detroit River, or across the 49th parallel to the world's largest economy. And it sort of begot this 40-year period. I look at it as a bit of complacency. And now we find ourselves a little bit fat and lazy and complacent. And I'm not saying specific Canadians are fat and lazy and complacent, but just overall, you look at all of the metrics around the Canadian economy, our labor productivity, our GDP per capita. We outperform the United States in many other quality of life indices, but those economic ones, we are lagging. This tariff threat has been that bucket of cold water that I think is now shocking people into the reality that we have to work harder. We have to get rid of interprovincial trade barriers, which, as an economist for 30 years, I've been, banging the drum about this. Now it is sort of on a political consciousness level. We have to work harder to diversify our trade to other countries. We have to work harder at making infrastructure projects, including pipelines and electricity power grid lines and all of these things that we should have been doing for years. But now there is more urgency around it. For the United States, I think the good news is maybe different because they haven't been lulled into that complacency. But I do think it is now, I don't know, there is now more conversation in the United States about just how dependent is the United States on global trade. I don't think a lot of Americans are, unless you're an American industry that sources something from abroad, and you've always been conscious of how global supply chains work and how advantageous they are. But for a lot of Americans, I think this is now starting to become a long overdue conversation about America's role in the global economy, what it means for the rest of the world, but also the benefit that it means for the United States. And I think there is tremendous benefit. And for the first time now, I'm hearing Americans having that conversation and a heightened awareness about what global trade means to the benefit of US citizens.
Can you run for politics?
I've been asked, but I don't have it in my blood to do that. That's my skin is too thin. I like being liked too much to be in politics.
Oh yeah, well, I hear you on that. But that was so well said that I couldn't agree with that more. I think that is such a wake up call, but still a positive message that then the world's not ending. At least we hope not. Knock on wood. But there's still opportunity. There's still things that can do, and we need to roll up our sleeves.
Yeah.
You can't just rest on your laurels and expect things to just improve naturally. And nobody's coming to the rescue. There's no one going to wave a magic wand. It's up to the country. It's up to the people in the country. It's up to other countries as well to recognize that there's some work ahead of us, and we can't just relax. So yeah, I think that was very well said. Any books? I mentioned the one that you had here, Spiders in Space, which I highly recommend, by the way. Any books in the works? Any new?
I don't have any other books. There was a sequel to that book, Spiders in COVID Space. So the one you held up, my co-author and I wrote that in 2017. And it was all about how do you adapt when everything you thought you knew suddenly changes on you. We didn't know that by 2020, the global economy was going to be hit with COVID. So during the pandemic, we wrote a sequel to that book called Spiders in COVID Space, and we tried to identify companies and industries and individuals that during the COVID, especially in the darkest days, in 2020, how they were able to pivot and reinvent themselves and adapt to that situation, and then identifying what traits were present in each one of those successful adapters, and what can we learn from that. Other than those two, no, I don't have any book ideas on the go at the moment. I'm glad, actually, as a public speaker, I'm glad I don't earn most of my income from books, and I don't envy, people who write books, really successful books, because then there's always pressure. When's the next book coming? What's the next book idea? And probably publishers, calling the writer saying, we need a chapter. We need something on your next book idea. I don't have one right now, so I guess I'm in a good spot without having to write a book.
You might have to do the Spiders in Space post-Trump edition.
Well, maybe, yeah, maybe spiders in tariff war space or something like that. We'll see how the rest of 2025 evolves, but it's a great example. Like COVID was probably the best example, but this tariffs, what do Canadian companies do, or global companies everywhere, or American companies for that matter? What do you do when everything you thought you knew about your global supply chains has suddenly, shifted on you entirely? How do you adapt and pivot? So we'll see how the rest of 2025 goes, but that might be good book idea.
I heard someone say the other day, I wish we could just go back to March of 2020. This is speaking facetiously about just the chaos in the world. I should go back to COVID. I don't think he was actually meant it, but I laughed at that. I thought that was pretty good. Where are you speaking these days? Any events coming up that people might be able to check it out?
I've got a couple events. May is actually a pretty good month. I've got a couple events in Calgary and Edmonton. Both of them are kind of closed events, so I don't have a public one. Although I do have a really interesting one coming up, and people can follow me on LinkedIn for details on it, because this would be a public one. I'm doing one here July 2nd in Calgary. Calgary Economic Development is going to be hosting it. I'm going to be giving a keynote and then moderating a panel, and it's going to be talking specifically about technology and how does technology, including AI, what are the best opportunities we have to navigate our way through this chaos using technology. So that's coming up July 2nd. I know that's about 6 weeks away yet, but if people are interested, follow me on LinkedIn and there'll be details about that for those of you in Calgary.
Yeah, I'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes as well, because I highly recommend people follow you, because you put out some great insights, and it's not controversial, other than a little provocative, like you said, occasionally, but you put out some great insights. So I'll recommend people connect with you on LinkedIn. Is that best way to get a hold of you? I know you've got your website as well.
That's the best way, or my website, toddhirsch.com. But, a direct message on LinkedIn is probably the very best.
Awesome. Any closing notes you want to end with?
No, other than that, even though we're in a time of chaos, I think it's important that we all remain optimistic and focused on the things that we can control. Remember that we are all humans, and human connection and human kindness is really the most essential thing. It's easy to sometimes lose sight of that when we are feeling that the economic world is flying out of control around us. But I think it's important now more than ever to just remember that we can control how we treat other people, and human kindness and human connection is the key.
Those are very wise words. Todd, thank you once again for spending the hour with me. I always enjoy our conversations. This one was no different. So thank you once again.
Thanks again, Chad. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thanks everybody. And Todd specifically, thank you. Have a great long weekend, and we'll see you guys next time.